What's up, guys, and welcome back to Crypto Live Leak. I'm Ken, and today we got some exciting news on the table for you, including a Twitter storm sent off by Vitalik, the creator of Ethereum. But first, I just want to give Aretha Franklin a shout out today. She passed away today from a long battle with pancreatic cancer, and we all know the great strides she made for the music industry along with other social industry as well. So rest in peace, Aretha Franklin, and let's hop into it. So on Twitter today, we had Vitalik, non-giver of Ether, basically go on a 70-plus tweet storm, basically giving the update for Casper, which is the Ethereum protocol upgrade to make their consensus algorithm proof of stake. So some other changes that already do proof of stake include Tezos, Lisk, and Neo. Neo being the only one where the inflationary dividend device incentive is not rewarded in the native token, but a separate token. In their case, it's called gas. So essentially, let's get right into it. Today, I'm going to make a tweet storm explaining the history and state of Ethereum's Casper research, including the FFG and CBC wars, the hybrid versus full switch, the role of randomness, mechanisms, design issues, and more. So basically there are two different versions of Casper that have been debated between Vlad and Vitalik himself, and he goes into this in detail, outlining the different timelines and where we are currently with these protocol upgrades. So Ethereum proof of stake research began in January of 2014. Interesting, because Tezos is a proof of stake protocol. It also began back in 2014, but just want to know they already have their protocol running, where you have the bakers and the people that can delegate to the bakers run the honest system of verifying transactions and baking blocks. They do it within 60 seconds. We'll see what Vitalik proposes here. So though the algorithm is highly suboptimal, it introduces some important ideas, most particularly the use of penalties to solve the nothing at stake problem. So penalties, that already sounds familiar to what Tezos does. Penalties for bakers if they act malicious. And that's used by, in the Tezos protocol, they do a deposit. When you bake a block, you have to put up a risked amount of XTZ that is then taken from you if you act maliciously. So that said, the penalties that Vitalik used were small, only canceling out signing rewards. Vlad Zamfir, which is the co-creator of Ethereum, Vitalik's right-hand man, he joined in the mid-2014, where he quickly moved toward requiring validators to put down deposits in much larger size than rewards that could be taken away for misbehavior. So drawing a lot of similarities here to what Tezos already does. And he goes into a retelling through Vlad's words. So they spent much of the late 2014 trying to deal with the long-range attacks, where attackers would basically start a separate chain that is a misbehaving chain, something that has incorrect transactions and is just a malicious chain. And at some point they would try to obtain more signatures on that fake chain than the actual main chain. And at that point, they could have already removed their rewards from that malicious behavior and withdrawn from the system, the ecosystem, and leaving any kind of penalty retracement impossible at that point. So he goes into this here: if the attack chain diverges from the main chain at a fairly recent point in time, this is not a problem, because if the validators sign two conflicting messages for two conflicting chains, they can be used as evidence to penalize them and take away their deposits. That's if their deposits are still in the system. So they go on here. We eventually decided that long-range attacks are unavoidable for penalties, much the reason proof of work proponents say. So he gives the other side of the coin. Why would you still do proof of work? So in that article there, he goes into it. But they don't accept their conclusions. They want to keep researching further. So they realized that they could deal with long-range attacks by introducing an additional security assumption that the client logs on at least once every 4 months, and deposits take 4 months to withdraw. So client simply refuses to revert further than that. This was anathema to proof of work proponents because it feels like a trust assumption. You need to get the blockchain from some trusted source when you sync from the first time. But to us, dirty subjectives, it did not seem like a big deal. You need some trusted source to tell you the consensus rules in the blockchain are in case. And don't forget the software updates. So any additional trust required by this proof of stake assumption is not large. So he's saying, well, he's a centralized authority that has to give you the software and the software updates. So he's not really, in that statement, he's not really proposing that any aspect of governance from the stakeholders is going to affect software updates, such as Tezos offers solutions to. So already I'm starting to see his version of proof of stake here is not as interactive with the stakeholders as some other models that are already currently live for proof of work mechanisms. Sorry, proof of stake mechanisms, such as Tezos. Okay, so now that they settled on deposits and penalties, they had to decide what those deposits and penalties are. So they wanted to do an economic finality property where validators could sign on blocks in such a way that once the block was finalized, no conflicting block could be finalized without a large portion of validators having to sign messages that conflict with their earlier messages in a way the blockchain could direct, recognize, and penalize for competing with that finalized block. He went on a big, long, and ultimately unproductive tangent on a direction he called consensus by bet. And this is essentially where validators could bet on which block is the correct or finalized version of the block, and there would be a reward for those that picked the correct block and a penalty for those who did not. The odds on validators' bets would start off low, but as validators saw each other getting in more and more confident about a block, everyone's odds would rise exponentially in parallel until everyone, and eventually they would bet their entire deposits on a block, and that would be the finality. And in the meantime, Vlad started heavily researching mechanism design, particularly with an eye to making Casper more robust against oligopolies, which is a common criticism to the Tezos Protocol. Oligopolies, basically only the rich can govern the poor. So are these bakers participating in Tezos becoming only the wealthy? They do try to work around this by creating baking software for the self-individual, but it is required to have at least 10,000 Tezos to bake a roll, Tezos, XTZ. So in that in itself, let's say it's $100 per XTZ, 10,000, you're gonna have to have a minimum of $1 million to get in. So, you know, unfortunately, that would be a limitation in an oligopoly type system where they do give the user the ability to switch their delegation. So let's say you have less, you can still delegate, so you can still voice your opinion by delegation. So if you like one baker voting one direction, you can delegate to them, therefore giving them your votes. And you can easily switch that before voting time arises. And I guess theoretically that should help with the oligopoly accusations towards Tezos, so to say, if there are any. So Vlad decided that traditional BFT was lame. He particularly disliked hard thresholds like 2/3 in order to pick the final block. So correct by construction is CBC. And this is the theory that he designed from scratch and his unique approach. In Vlad's own words, he defines CBC here. They go into a Medium post. The correct by construction philosophy is very different from the traditional BFT in that finality, the entirely subjective. In CBC philosophy, validators sign messages, and if they sign a message that conflicts with the earlier message, they have to submit a justification proving that, in the relevant sense, they're voting for something newer that has more support than the old way they were trying to vote, and they have the right to switch it. So they basically go back and forth here about which way is better, and they also wanted to create a sort of hybrid upgrade where these would have to be forks of Ethereum, and it would have to be a consensus update to run the new chains, and that's how they would implement such changes such as Casper. So already you see there's no way to self-amend a ledger, and they're just basically proposing the forks that have these layers, these Casper upgrades, CBC upgrades already worked into a new version of the protocol. So to me, I just see a lot of centralized decision making between Vlad and Vitalik, and you know, given they are very intelligent, probably the pinnacles of the blockchain research industry, you're still dependent on them. Let's say something happened to them and they couldn't produce any updates to the system. How would be, where would the mechanism come from that point from new contributors? And is anyone else incentivized to contribute? If you believe in power of the masses, like Tezos believes in, they have designed a system where you can literally propose any upgrade, attach an invoice to it, and then it goes to vote. If there's a majority vote, I guess you're talking thresholds, so it doesn't seem like Vlad here likes thresholds. But if you hit this majority vote, the chain proposal wraps itself into the protocol without creating hard forks. So it's just a consensus update to the software. And it's important to note that these are pieces of software. This is the evolution of operating systems. And with the more use cases that come out, you're going to see more transactions on these networks and the requirement for them to scale. So Vitalik also goes into sharding aspects in this tweet thread here, and he wants to now roll those in fresh when he introduces this proposed upgrade here, this Casper upgrade. So sharding would be horizontal databases that have collections of data, and as long as the header is proved correct, you can have unlimited amount of different headers, and you then have another layer of validation just coming down to the headers. So theoretically, those additional rows of data can validate at a more exponentially increased transaction per second time frame. And EOS goes into this more. I know that Velos is something that just got proposed by Stephen Andrew for the Tezos community, and that would be huge to see something like that get wrapped into the protocol with one of the first invoices and proposals. So that could have happened for Tezos, maybe in the next 3 to 6 months here, but it seems like Ethereum and Vitalik, they still can't decide on which version of their upgrade to implement. They're having problems with governance. They don't really address that much. So, great update for Vitalik and Ethereum, but this just opens my eyes further to the fact that there are blockchains out there now that are better set up for where the future of this industry is heading. Proof of stake, self-amending ledgers, governance. That's all very important aspects that we need to start asking ourselves which chain is going to succeed in those areas for the next boom cycle in the market, and that's probably going to be the leader for smart contracts platforms, at least, if not simulated currency platforms as well. So, all right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this update video. And don't forget, we have a live stream going on tonight, 8/16 at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And also August 30th coming up. How did I forget this? August 30th, downtown at WeWork at 1 Beacon Street. It's called Genesis Block. How cool is that? We're hosting a Tezos Boston Meetup #2. And this is going to go from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. So why don't you guys sign up on meetup.com. If you just search on the links below, you'll be able to do that and RSVP. I hope to see you guys there. Until next time, take care.